Frank Miller sat on his porch and watched the sun go down. At 78 years old, he had seen many sunsets, but he still loved how the sky turned orange and pink. His old wooden rocking chair creaked as he moved back and forth. The cool Montana air felt good on his face. 7 years had passed since his wife Helen died. Now he lived alone in this small house, far from any neighbors. His children and grandchildren lived in Seattle and only visited a few times a year. Frank didn't mind being alone most of the time. He had his garden, his books about space and rockets, and his memories. Frank had worked for 40 years designing parts for rockets. He was an aerospace engineer, though he never got to build the really big rockets that went to the moon. Still, he was proud of his work. Now that he was retired, he spent his days reading, growing vegetables, and fixing things. Around his house dot, as the last bit of sun disappeared behind the mountains, Frank noticed something strange in the sky. A light, brighter than any star, moved quickly across the darkness. At first, he thought it was a plane, but it moved too fast and in the wrong way. "That's not normal," Frank said to himself. He stood up from his chair, his old knees cracking. As he did, the light grew brighter and seemed to be coming toward him. Frank grabbed the porch rail as the light zoomed overhead with a sound like thunder. It crashed somewhere in his wheat field behind the house. Most people would have called 911 right away. But Frank was curious. He had always wondered about what might exist beyond Earth. He went inside, grabbed his flashlight and his old baseball cap, and headed toward where the light had landed. The night was dark, except for the stars and a half-moon. Frank walked carefully through his garden and into the wheat field. The tall plants brushed against his legs as he moved. Soon he saw smoke rising ahead and smelled something burning. His flashlight beam caught a path where something had cut through his wheat. "Hello?" Frank called out, not really expecting an answer. "Is anyone there?" He moved closer and stopped in shock. There, in a small clearing made by the crash, was what looked like a ship. Not an airplane or a helicopter, but something else. It was about the size of a small car, round with a dome on top. Parts of it glowed with blue light, and other parts sparked and smoked. It was like nothing Frank had ever seen before, except maybe in science fiction movies. "My goodness," Frank whispered. Then he saw movement. Something was crawling away from the ship. Frank's hand shook as he pointed his flashlight at it. The beam revealed a figure about the size of a human, moving slowly on the ground. Frank hesitated. Should he run back to his house and call for help? But what if whoever was there needed help right now? He decided to get closer. As he approached, the figure turned toward his light. Frank almost dropped his flashlight in surprise. The face looking at him was not human. The skin was a pale blue color that seemed to shine in the light. The eyes were huge, almond-shaped, and completely black. There was no nose, just 2 small holes, and the mouth was tiny. The creature had no hair, and its head was larger than a human's would be. It was an alien. There was no other word for it. An actual being from another world. The alien reached out a hand toward Frank. It had long, thin fingers with what looked like suction cups at the tips. The creature made sounds that Frank couldn't understand, but the meaning seemed clear. It needed help. Frank noticed a wound on the alien side, leaking a silvery liquid that must have been its blood. Despite his shock and fear, Frank felt sorry for the injured being. "You're hurt," he said, knowing the alien probably couldn't understand him. "Let me help you." Frank moved closer and knelt beside the alien. It was wearing something like a tight-fitting suit made of a material Frank had never seen before. The alien spoke again, the sounds musical but strange. Frank pointed to himself. "Frank," he said clearly. The alien seemed to understand what he was doing. It pointed a long finger at its own chest and made a sound that Frank couldn't hope to repeat. "I'll just call you Blue for now," Frank said. "Let's get you somewhere safe." The alien was light, maybe 80 pounds. Frank was old, but still strong. Enough to help Blue stand. Together they walked slowly toward Frank's house, the alien leaning heavily on him. Frank wondered what he was getting himself into, but he couldn't leave an injured being out in a cold night inside his house. Frank helped Blue onto his couch. The alien looked around with those big black eyes, taking in everything. Frank went to get his first aid kit, not sure if human medicine would help an alien, but wanting to try something. When he returned, Blue was holding a small device and pushing buttons on it. Lights blinked, and more strange sounds came from the alien's mouth. Frank cleaned the wound as best he could. The silvery blood was thicker than human blood, almost like mercury, but not as heavy. Blue winced, but let Frank work. He covered the Zingove wound with gauze and tape, hoping that would help. All night, Frank sat in his armchair, watching over his strange visitor. Sometimes Blue would fall asleep, making soft humming sounds. Other times, the alien would wake up and look at Frank with those big eyes. Once, Blue reached out and touched Frank's hand, as if saying thank you. Frank couldn't believe what was happening. After 78 years of ordinary life, he now had an actual alien in his living room. What would happen when morning came? Should he call the government? Would they take Blue away to some secret lab? The thought made Frank uncomfortable. As the first light of dawn came through his windows, Frank made a decision. He would help Blue, at least for now. Something about the alien's eyes told Frank that Blue was intelligent and afraid. Frank had worked for the government long enough to know how they might treat such a discovery. Blue woke up as sunlight filled the room. The alien looked better after a night's rest. Frank brought a glass of water, and Blue sniffed it before taking a small sip. "We'll figure this out," Frank said, though he had no idea how. "I promise I'll help you." Blue made that musical sound again, and for a moment, Frank thought he could almost understand it. One thing was certain. His quiet, lonely life had just become very complicated. Frank Miller had been just an old man yesterday. Today, he was perhaps the first human being to help a visitor from the stars. 3 days passed since Frank found the blue alien. Each day, Blue seemed to get stronger. The wound on Blue's side was healing faster than any human wound would. Frank brought food, but Blue only ate some fruits and drank water. The alien spent hours looking at the small device from the ship, pushing buttons and making it light up. On the 4th morning, Frank made coffee and toast for himself. He sat at his kitchen table while Blue watched him from the couch. Frank wondered how they would ever talk to each other. He pointed to his coffee cup. "Coffee," he said clearly. Blue made a sound that wasn't even close to the word coffee. Frank smiled and shook his head. "That's okay. We'll figure something out." Blue stood up and walked to the window. The alien's movements were smoother now. Frank noticed for the first time that Blue was female, at least in shape. She was thin with long arms and legs. Her fingers were twice as long as human fingers. She pointed outside. "You want to go out?" Frank asked. Blue nodded. This surprised Frank. She understood that nodding meant yes. Had she been watching humans? "For a while?" "Okay, but stay close to the house. We don't want anyone to see you." Frank opened the back door. Blue stepped outside and looked up at the sky. She made a sad sound. Frank guessed she was thinking about her home. "Your ship is pretty." "Smashed up," Frank said. "I don't think you can fix it." Blue walked to the edge of Frank's garden. She bent down and touched a tomato plant. Then she pointed to the sky, then back at the plant. "You have plants where you come from?" Frank asked. Blue nodded again. "After breakfast," Frank took Blue to see her ship. They walked through the wheat field until they reached the crash site. In daylight, the ship looked even stranger. It was made of a metal Frank had never seen before. Parts of it still glowed with blue light. Blue went to the ship and opened a hidden door. She reached inside and pulled out a box about the size of a shoebox. When she opened it, Frank saw tools, strange-looking tools, but tools all the same. "You're going to try to fix something?" Frank asked. Blue didn't answer. She went back into the ship and pulled out more things. A small screen, some wires, and something that looked like a battery. She brought these back to Frank's house. For the next 2 days, Blue worked with her tools and the parts from the ship. She sat at Frank's kitchen table, putting things together. Frank watched, amazed at how her long fingers moved so quickly and carefully. On the 3rd day, Blue finished whatever she was making. It looked like a small computer with a screen and some buttons. She turned it on and touched the screen. Then she spoke in her strange language, and words appeared on the screen. She handed it to Frank. He looked at the screen and was shocked to see English words there. "Hello, I am Narila. Thank you for helping me." "Narila? That's your name?" Frank asked. Blue, or Narila, nodded. She took the device back and spoke again. The screen showed, "I am scientist from world called Lyraxis. My ship was attacked. I escaped." Frank sat down, his legs suddenly weak. He was talking to an alien. A real conversation. "Why were you near Earth?" he asked. Narila typed on the device and then showed him. "We study Earth. Peaceful mission. Learning about humans." "How long have your people been watching us?" Frank asked. "Many years. We watch. We learn. We do not interfere." Frank had so many questions. "Are there others like you on Earth now?" Narila shook her head. "My team was in big ship. We were attacked by Vrex, bad people. They hate new species like humans. I escaped in small ship. Crashed here. Will your people come looking for you?" Frank asked. Narila's big black eyes seemed sad. "Not know where I am. Need to send message." Over. The next few days, Frank and Narila talked more and more. The translation device got better as Narila improved it. Frank learned that her people, the Lyraxians, had been studying Earth for over 50 years. They were scientists and explorers who found new worlds and watched them develop. They never interfered with growing civilizations. The Vrex were different. They were warriors who believed that new species like humans were dangerous and should be controlled or destroyed. The Vrex had attacked the Lyraxian research ship, and Narila had barely escaped. "Will the Vrex come to Earth?" Frank asked one evening as they sat on his porch. "Maybe. They know Lyraxians watch Earth. They may look for me." Frank didn't like the sound of that. What do these Vrex look like? Can they blend in with humans? They look like tall humans, but with silver eyes. They can change skin color to match humans. Hard to find. Frank thought about this. Aliens that looked almost human could be anywhere. The idea made him nervous. Narila seemed to sense his worry. She showed him a picture of her world on her device. It showed beautiful cities made of crystal towers that caught the light of 2 suns. The sky was purple, and the plants were silver. "Your world is beautiful," Frank said. "Yes, Miss Home," Narila replied. Frank told Narila about his life. He talked about Helen, his wife who died 7 years ago. He showed her pictures of his children and grandchildren. He explained his work designing parts for rockets and spaceships. This made Narila very excited. She typed quickly, "Your work. Important. Your designs for rocket engines very good. Almost discovered key to stars." "What do you mean?" Frank asked. "Your ideas about engine design. Very close to how our ships work. We watched you because of this." Frank was stunned. You watched me? Specifically me? Yes, your work important. You almost found way to travel between stars. Frank sat back in his chair. All those years, his bosses had ignored his best ideas, saying they were too expensive or impossible. But alien scientists had noticed. They thought his work was important. One morning, Frank heard a car coming up his long driveway. This was unusual. He looked out the window and saw a black SUV. Narila, hide, he whispered urgently. Someone is coming. Narila gathered her devices and went to the back of the house. Frank had shown her a hiding place in the root cellar under. His tool shed. Frank opened the front door as two men in dark suits got out of the SUV. They looked serious and official. Mr. Frank Miller? One of them asked. That's me, Frank said, trying to sound calm. We're from NASA's Special Projects Division. We'd like to ask you about a meteorite that may have landed on your property last week. Frank's heart beat faster, but he kept his face calm. His life had been simple and quiet for so long. Now he was hiding an alien and lying to government agents. But something told him that Narila needed his protection, and Frank Miller wasn't going to let her down. Frank stood on his porch looking at the two men in dark suits. They were both young, maybe in their 30s. One was tall with short brown hair, and the other was shorter with glasses. A meteorite? Frank said, trying to sound surprised. When? Was this supposed to have happened? About a week ago, the tall man said. Several people in the area reported seeing a bright light in the sky. Our calculations suggest it may have landed somewhere on your property. Frank scratched his chin, like he was thinking. Well, I did see a light in the sky last week. Thought it was just a shooting star. I didn't notice anything land nearby. Mind if we take a look around? Asked the man with glasses. Frank knew he couldn't say no without making them suspicious. Sure, but it's a big property. 70 acres of mostly wheat fields. What exactly are you looking for? Any unusual object, disturbed ground, damaged plants. This meteorite would be of great scientific interest, the tall man said. I'm something of a science enthusiast myself, Frank said. Used to work for NASA contractors back in the day. Propulsion systems. This seemed to interest the men. Really? What department? Asked the one with glasses. Frank talked about his old work while he walked with the men around his property. He carefully led them away from where Narila's ship had crashed. They spent nearly an hour walking through wheat fields and checking the edges of his land. Sorry, we couldn't find anything, Frank said as they headed back to his house. If I spot anything unusual, who should I call? The tall man handed Frank a business card. Agent Jack Wilson. That number will reach me directly. After the agents left, Frank waited 30 minutes to make sure they were really gone. Then he went to the root cellar to get Narila. She was sitting in the corner, working on her device. When she saw Frank, she stood up quickly. They gone? She asked in her musical voice. Her translation device was getting better. Now it could speak simple sentences out loud instead of just showing words on the screen. Yes, they're gone, but they might come back. They're looking for your ship. Narila's big black eyes blinked slowly. Must hide ship better. That evening, Frank and Narila went to the crash site. Using tools from her ship, Narila removed more parts that she said were important. Then they covered the ship with branches, leaves, and wheat stalks to hide it from view. As they worked, Narila suddenly froze. She held up one of her devices, which was making a soft beeping sound. What is it? Frank asked. Bad signal. Vrex signal. They come. Frank felt cold fear in his stomach. The Vrex are coming here? To Earth? Yes, they track my ship. Send hunters. Back. At the house, Narila worked frantically with her devices. She explained that she needed to warn her people about the Vrex coming to Earth, her own people. The Lyraxians could help protect Earth if they knew what was happening. How can you contact them? Frank asked. Your ship is broken. Need stronger. Signal. Need to boost power. Narila pointed to the old satellite dish on Frank's roof. Can use that. Also need more parts. Frank thought for a moment. I might know where we can get what you need. The next day, Frank drove his old pickup truck to town. Narila hid under blankets in the back seat. They went to an electronics store where Frank bought wire, batteries, and tools. The young clerk was surprised to see the old man buying so many. Electronic parts. Working on a big project, Mr. Miller? The clerk asked. Just fixing up some old equipment, Frank said with a smile. On the way home, Frank noticed a black SUV parked near the town's only traffic light. He couldn't tell if it was the same one from yesterday, but he didn't want to take chances. He took a different road home, one that went the long way through farmland. As they drove, Narila looked out the window at the fields and farms. Your world very green, very pretty. Not as pretty as your crystal cities, Frank said. Different, but good. When they got home, Narila started working with the parts they had bought. She connected them to her devices and to Frank's satellite dish. Frank helped as best he could, following her instructions. While they worked, Narila told Frank more. About her people. The Lyraxians lived for about 300 Earth years. They had been traveling in space for thousands of years. They believed in peace and knowledge. They had rules against interfering with developing worlds like Earth. Why not interfere? Frank asked. You could help us with medicine, technology, solving hunger and war. Must grow own way, Narila said. If give technology too soon can be bad, need to be ready. That made sense to Frank. It was like giving a child a powerful tool before they were mature enough to use it safely. As night fell, they finished the work on the communication device. Narila aimed the satellite dish at a certain part of the sky. Now we wait, she said. Send signal. Hope my people hear. They sat on the porch together, looking up at the stars. Frank made tea, and Narila tried a small sip. She made a face that Frank guessed was disgust, and he laughed. Not all Earth things are good, I guess, he said. Suddenly, Narila's device made a loud beeping sound. She grabbed it and looked at the screen. Vrex ship enter Earth orbit, she said, her voice worried. They send down hunters soon. What will these hunters do? Frank asked. Find me. Kill me. Maybe hurt humans too. Frank thought about his quiet life before Narila crashed in his field. He had been lonely, passing his days with little excitement or purpose. Now he was helping an alien scientist and possibly protecting Earth from dangerous aliens. It was scary, but he felt more alive than he had in years. We won't let that happen, Frank said firmly. The next morning, Frank woke up early. He looked out his window and saw 3 black SUVs coming up his driveway. This time, it wasn't just 2 agents. There were at least 6 men in suits getting out of the vehicles. Frank rushed to wake Narila. Government agents are here. Many of them. We need to hide you. Narila gathered her devices quickly. No, not all government. Look at eyes. Frank looked out the window again. From this distance, he couldn't see clearly, but one of the men turned toward the house, and for a moment, Frank thought he saw the man's eyes shine with a silver light. Vrex hunters, Narila said. They find me. Frank's heart raced. The Vrex were here, looking like humans but with silver eyes, just as Narila had described, and they were coming for her. Is your message to your people sent? Frank asked. Yes, but no answer yet. Need more time. Frank made a quick decision. Then we'll give you more time. I'll talk to them. Slow them down. You hide and keep working on the signal. Narila touched Frank's hand with her long blue fingers. Dangerous. Vrex hurt humans. I'm just an old man, Frank said with a smile. But I'm not afraid. Now go hide. I'll handle this. As Narila slipped out the back door toward the root cellar, Frank straightened his shirt and went to the front door. He might be old, but he still had some fight left in him. And he wasn't going to let aliens hurt his new friend or his planet without doing something about it. Frank opened his front door and stepped onto the porch. The 6 men in dark suits walked toward him. From this distance, Frank could see that 3 of them had normal eyes, but the other 3 had eyes that flashed silver in the morning light. Those must be the Vrex hunters Narila warned him about. "Good morning, gentlemen," Frank called out, trying to sound calm. "What brings so many of you to my home today?" One of the normal-eyed men stepped forward. Frank recognized him as Agent Wilson from yesterday. "Mr. Miller, we have reason to believe that what crashed on your property was not a meteorite. We need to search your house and land immediately." "May I ask what you think it was, if not a meteorite?" Frank asked, stalling for time. A man with silver eyes pushed past Agent Wilson. "Enough talk. We search now." Frank noticed Agent Wilson look at this man with surprise, as if he wasn't expecting such rudeness. "Now, hold on," Frank said. "This is private property. You need a warrant to search my house." "We have one," Agent Wilson said, holding up a paper. "Please step aside, Mr. Miller." Frank knew he couldn't stop them legally, but he could try to lead them away from the root cellar where Narila was hiding. "At least let me get my shoes on first," Frank said, "and I'll show you where I thought I saw something unusual yesterday after you left." The silver-eyed man looked angry, but Agent Wilson nodded. "That would be helpful, Mr. Miller." Frank went inside, moving slowly. He put on his shoes and grabbed his hat. Through the window, he could see the men talking. The silver-eyed men seemed to be arguing with Agent Wilson and the other normal-eyed agents. When Frank came back outside, the men stopped talking. Frank pointed to the far side of his property, away from the root cellar and the crash site. "Yesterday evening I saw some disturbed ground over by those trees. Might be what you're looking for." Agent Wilson nodded. "Lead the way, Mr. Miller." Frank walked slowly, both because of his age and to give Narila more time. He led the men through his wheat field, telling them about the history of his farm and how, asking questions about NASA. The normal-eyed agents were polite, but the silver-eyed men seemed impatient. When they reached the trees, Frank pointed to a spot where a deer had dug up the ground. "There it is. Looks like something disturbed the earth here." Agent Wilson bent down to look. The silver-eyed men looked too, but they didn't seem convinced. "This is not what we seek," one of them said in a strange, flat voice. Suddenly, a beeping sound came from one of the silver-eyed men's pockets. He pulled out a device that looked similar to one of Narila's. The man looked at it, then turned and pointed toward Frank's house. "The signal comes from there. The Lyraxian is there." Frank's heart sank. They had detected Narila's communication attempt. Agent Wilson looked confused. "Lyraxian? What are you talking about?" "We're looking for debris from a satellite re-entry." The silver-eyed man ignored him and started walking quickly back toward the house. The other silver-eyed men followed. Frank and the normal-eyed agents hurried to catch up. "What's going on?" Agent Wilson asked. "Who are these people?" They said they were from a special division of NASA, but I've never seen them before today. Frank made a quick decision. They're not from NASA. They're not even human. They're aliens called the Vrex, and they're hunting another alien who crashed on my property. Agent Wilson stared at Frank like he was crazy. "Mr. Miller, that's... Look." "At their eyes," Frank said. "Have you ever seen eyes like that? Silver and reflective, like mirrors? And haven't you noticed how strange they talk and act?" Agent Wilson and the other agents looked at the men walking ahead of them. One of the silver-eyed men turned back, and in the sunlight, his eyes flashed unnaturally. "My God," Agent Wilson whispered. "What is happening here?" "I'll explain everything, but right now we need to stop them. They want to kill the alien I've been helping. She's peaceful. She's a scientist. These Vrex are the dangerous ones." For a moment, Frank thought Agent Wilson wouldn't believe him. Then the agent nodded and spoke quietly to the other two normal-eyed men. They reached into their jackets and pulled out guns. "Stop right there," Agent Wilson shouted to the silver-eyed. Men. The Vrex hunters turned around. Their faces showed no emotion. "This does not concern you, humans," one of them said. "We seek only the Lyraxian." "You're on Earth now," Agent Wilson said. "Everything that happens here concerns us. Put your hands up and identify yourselves properly." The Vrex hunters looked at each other. Then, faster than Frank thought possible, they pulled out strange-looking weapons. A bright flash of light shot out from one of the weapons, hitting one of the agents. The man fell to the ground. "Take cover," Agent Wilson shouted, pushing Frank down behind a large rock. More flashes of light shot through the air. Agent Wilson and the remaining agent fired their guns, but the bullets seemed to have little effect on the Vrex hunters. "Your weapons cannot harm us," one of the Vrex called out. "Surrender the Lyraxian, and you will not be harmed." Frank felt helpless. He was just an old man. What could he do against aliens with advanced weapons? But he had to protect Narila. Suddenly, Frank remembered something from his days working on rocket propulsion. There was a tank of propane behind his tool shed, not far from where they were hiding. Propane was highly flammable. "Agent Wilson," Frank whispered. "I have an idea, but I need to get to my tool shed." "It's too dangerous," Wilson said. "Those weapons they're using, I've never seen anything like them. Trust me, I know what I'm doing." While Wilson and the other agent fired their guns to distract the Vrex, Frank crawled away through the tall wheat. His old knees hurt, and his heart pounded, but he kept going. When he reached the tool shed, he stayed low and moved around to the back where the propane tank sat. He turned the valve to release some of the gas, then looked for something to create a spark. Inside the shed, Frank found a road flare in his emergency kit. This would work. He crawled back outside and saw that the Vrex hunters were getting closer. To the root cellar. They would find Narila soon. Frank lit the flare and threw it as hard as he could toward the propane tank. Then he ducked down and covered his head. The explosion was bigger than Frank expected. The ground shook and heat washed over him. When he looked up, he saw that the Vrex hunters had been knocked down by the blast. Agent Wilson and the other agent rushed forward with their guns pointed at the fallen Vrex. "Mr. Miller, are you all right?" Wilson called. "I'm fine," Frank said, standing up slowly. "Check if they're still alive." Before Wilson could reach the Vrex, a bright light appeared in the sky above them. It was so bright that Frank had to shield his eyes. A humming sound filled the air, growing louder. "What now?" Agent Wilson asked, looking up. Frank smiled. "I think it's the cavalry." A ship, much larger than Narila's small craft, descended from the clouds. It was sleek and silver with blue lights along its sides. It hovered above Frank's wheat field, sending waves of wind that made the plants bend. The root cellar door flew open, and Narila rushed out. She looked up at the ship and made happy sounds in her musical language. "Your people?" Frank asked as she reached him. "Yes," Narila said through her translation device. "They hear signal. They come." A beam of light shot down from the ship, and 3 tall blue figures appeared. They looked like Narila, but were taller and wore what looked like armor. They carried devices that Frank guessed were weapons. The Lyraxians moved quickly to the fallen Vrex hunters. They placed small discs on each Vrex, and the hunters' bodies glowed briefly. And the Lyraxians turned toward Frank, Agent Wilson, and Narila. Agent Wilson still held his gun, looking unsure. Frank put a hand on his arm. "It's okay. These are the good ones." Narila stepped forward and spoke to the other Lyraxians in there. "Language." They responded, and one of them handed her a new device. She attached it to her translator. "My people thank you, Frank Miller," Narila said, her voice coming through the translator more clearly now. "You saved me. You help warn about Vrex. You protect Earth." "I'm just an old man," Frank said with a smile. "I did what anyone would do." The tallest Lyraxian spoke, and Narila translated. "Not true. You show best of humans. Brave, kind, smart. This why we watch Earth. Humans have great future." Agent Wilson stepped forward. "I have about 1,000 questions right now." "And we will answer them," Narila said. "Earth now in danger from Vrex. Need to prepare. Need to work together." Frank looked at the Lyraxian ship hovering above his wheat field, at the fallen Vrex hunters, at Agent Wilson's stunned face, and at Narila's big black eyes, looking at him with gratitude. His quiet retirement had certainly taken an unexpected turn. "Well," Frank said with a smile, "I guess I won't be bored anymore." 1 week had passed since the Lyraxian ship landed in Frank's wheat field. So much had changed in that short time. Frank's quiet farm had become a center of activity. Government officials, scientists, and more Lyraxians came and went. They set up temporary buildings and equipment around his house. Frank sat on his porch in his rocking chair, watching it all happen. Agent Wilson walked up the steps and sat in the chair next to him. "How are you holding up, Mr. Miller?" Wilson asked. "Call me Frank," he said, "and I'm doing fine." "It's all a bit much, but interesting." Wilson nodded. "The president wants to meet you. You're the first human to help an alien visitor. You're a hero." Frank laughed. "I'm just an old man who did what seemed right at the time. Well, that old man may have helped save Earth." The Lyraxians had explained that the Vrex were a serious threat. They had been watching Earth for years, seeing it as a planet with good resources. They wanted to take over Earth before humans became too advanced. The Vrex ship that attacked Narila's research vessel was just the first. More would come. "Have you talked to Narila today?" Frank asked. "She's been in meetings with our scientists." "All morning," Wilson said. "She's teaching them about Vrex technology and weaknesses. It's amazing how much she knows." Frank smiled. He was proud of Narila. In just a few days, she had become an important link between humans and Lyraxians. Her translator now worked perfectly, allowing her to speak easily with everyone. Later that day, Narila came to find Frank. He was in his garden, pulling weeds. Some things didn't change, even when aliens visited. "Frank," she said, her musical voice now clear through her translator. "I have news to share with you." Frank stood up slowly, his knees cracking. "Good news, I hope?" "My people's council has made a decision. Earth will be offered protection and alliance. We will share some technology to help you defend against the Vrex." "That is good news," Frank said. "There is more," Narila continued. "The council was impressed by you. A single human who helped me and stood against the Vrex. They say you show the best qualities of humans." Frank felt his face grow warm. "I just did what seemed right. The council has offered you something special. A chance to visit Lyraxis." Frank's heart skipped a beat. "Visit your world?" "Me?" "Yes. You would be the first human to travel to another star system. You would see my home, meet our leaders, and help create the alliance between our worlds." Frank looked around at his small farm. He had lived here for 40 years. It was his home. But the chance to see another world, to travel among the stars like he had dreamed about as a young man working on rocket engines, it was almost too much to imagine. "What about my age?" Frank asked. I'm 78. I don't know how many years I have left. Narila smiled, or at least Frank thought it was a smile. Her small mouth curved up at the edges. We have medical technology that can help with that. Not immortality, but more time, better health. No pain in your knees. Frank laughed. That alone might be worth the trip. You do not need to decide now, Narila said. Think about it. That night, Frank couldn't sleep. He got up and went outside to look at the stars. The Lyraxian ship glowed softly in his field. It was beautiful and strange and wonderful. All at once, Frank thought about his life. His wife Helen had been gone for 7 years. His children penned. Grandchildren visited only a few times a year. They had their own busy lives. Frank had been alone, and if he was honest, a little lonely before Narila crashed into his field. Now he had a chance to do something no human had ever done before. To see things no human had ever seen. To help create peace between worlds. In the morning, Frank found Narila working with some Earth scientists near the ship. I've made my decision, he told her. I want to go to Lyraxis. Narila's big black eyes seemed to shine. You will not regret this, Frank. It will be wonderful. The next few days were busy with preparations. Frank needed to put his affairs in order. He called his son and daughter to explain what was happening. At first, they thought he was confused or joking, but Agent Wilson spoke to them and confirmed everything. They were shocked but supportive. Dad, you always loved space and science fiction, his daughter said on the phone. Now you get to live it. Just promise you'll come back and tell us all about it. I promise, Frank said. The day of departure came. A small crowd gathered near the Lyraxian ship. Government officials, scientists, and a few reporters who had been allowed to know about the situation. Frank's son and daughter had flown into. Say goodbye. Frank hugged them both. I'll be back in a year, he promised, with amazing stories to tell. Be careful, Dad, his son said. Take pictures, his daughter added with a smile. Frank walked toward the ship with Narila beside him. He carried only a small bag with personal items. The Lyraxians would provide everything else he needed. Agent Wilson stepped forward to shake Frank's hand. Good luck, Frank. You're making history today. Thank you for believing me, Frank said. Not many would have. I've learned to keep ganache. Open mind, Wilson replied. As Frank approached the ship, a door opened in its smooth side. Light spilled out, warm and inviting. Narila went in first, then turned to wait for Frank. Frank paused at the entrance and looked back at his farm, his house, the world he had known all his life. For a moment, doubt crept in. Was he really going to leave Earth and travel to another world at his age? Then he remembered how he felt when he first saw Narila crawling from her crashed ship. Afraid, yes, but also excited. Alive in a way he hadn't felt in years. Frank turned back to the ship and stepped inside. The interior was beautiful, with soft lights and surfaces that seemed to glow from within. Other Lyraxians nodded respectfully to him. Welcome, Frank Miller, one of them said through a translator. You honor us with your courage. Narila led Frank to a comfortable seat and showed him how to secure himself for the journey. Through a clear window, he could see his farm growing smaller as the ship rose into the sky. Are you afraid? Narila asked. Frank thought about it. A little, he admitted, but mostly I'm excited. I spent my life dreaming about the stars, working on engines that might someday reach them. I never thought I'd actually go there myself. Your work helped make it possible, Narila said. Your engine designs were important to us. They showed us that humans were close to understanding star travel, that you were ready to join the wider community of worlds. The ship rose higher, and Earth became a blue ball below them. Soon it would be just another star in the sky as they traveled to Lyraxis. Frank Miller had been just an old man living alone when an alien woman begged for his help. Now he was the first human ambassador to another world, with years of adventure ahead of him. Sometimes the most extraordinary journeys began with the simplest acts of kindness. As the ship accelerated toward the stars, Frank smiled. It was never too late for a new beginning.